I had just made the square that my mother had taught me how to make, and I told you that in the classroom I had two elders, my late mother Annie Andrew, and the other elder was Elena Pat. Elena Pat took my mother's square and said, I can make one just like your mom. But what I'm going to do is make a circle out of this, because this, and she did put it on with her diknuks and said, this fits my body size. So I'm going to make a circle out of this. But just as my mother did, she spoke to the students, and she told the students that we have a traditional belief that our earth, with its wind cardinal directions, falls upon the village, and we rely on the wind directions, and the village is our center point for the whole village group. And within the village we have the same round shape as the little circles that she was going to make, that represents the qazwi, which becomes the center point. And Elder said everything that we make and we put together, even a village, has a center point. So in a village, she said, is a qazwi, where many important teachings and festivals took place. And she said, the circle I'm going to make from this square will represent our Mother Earth with its wind directions. And with that, just as my mother did, she already explained that the square fit her body size. And once again, the traditional way of making a circle is to use accuracy in measuring. And her unit of measurement, again, is the diknuk, that unit of measurement. So to make this, to make the circle from the square, she first made a tool. Once again, just like my mother, she didn't rely on Gasak-made rulers. She made her own. And with the scrap, she'd cut off a piece and she'd measure against to make a tool. She wanted the height of half of the square. So I'm cutting the height of half of a square, and that was her tool. And this already has a line, but she said, your tool needs to have a center line. Again, having a center line, center points are very important. So she said, and she had one pre-made, so she said, this represents Mother Earth. Mother Earth has 4 winds. So she told me to write down she didn't call it the initial, she said the beginnings of, she said Gasadun North. So she said in English, she said she knows what north means, and she said Asil Nukanuka, the bad wind, Ngak. And I told her Ngam Acheni Chauga, what's the one below ngak? And she said, unga lalguk. And so we continued back and forth, and she came up with the Yupik words for east and west. And she said east is chalaga, unahwa wastak ganaknak. She said the four winds are very important to the location of the village. The houses are built with the door away from the ugly old wind. So she went down and she said, these tapchimalrit in between the winds, she said, are akunglas. The akunglas mean in between. So I said, oh, watan kakasatun, northwest. And she agreed. And I asked her, should I call the in between north and west, northwest? So once I knew that, I'd verify with her each time I wrote in between the two winds, northeast for between north and east, and came up with southwest and southeast. And she said those are the main winds the Yupik people generally use. And so with the new tool she made, the new tool is half of the square and it fits inside. And the new tool has a kugak, a center line. So now she used the new tool to find akunglas, the in between the winds. And she aligned the two lines, the diagonals, to the front line, asipa. And she aligned these lines to the vertex of the point to the center point to the kugak. And once they're aligned, then she drew lines. Doitamalkuita, all of them. And accuracy, she said, it should be fairly accurate. So now she had the four corners marked off. She said, kapluki. And the way she cut it the way I'm cutting it now. Cutting these corners very carefully, neatly, right on the lines. And she came to this part and she said, it's getting closer to the Nunango, to the pretend earth. So she said, but we have these gangiraks, these corners. So now she pinched the corners the two opposite corners and then folded. And she marked those. She was marking the in-between winds. So each of these with little sharp corners she'd carefully mark and just pinch the two corners together and then fold. And I find those are pretty accurate spots to fold. And she's talked about how people rely on weather, how we must care for one another. She talked about a little bit about the Yupik values and also how winds are very important. And she did say there were stories that relate to how weather takes care of us. So I'm marking all the tips that she talked about needed to be folded over. And these were the last tips that she folded. And as small as this is, I'm finding the way she made folds like this are pretty accurate. She went back to her new tool that she made and folded to the half, so everything was precisely folded. And once she found the half, she marked the little tips. So I'm carefully aligning each one to the in-between winds, just as she did. And accuracy is also very important. Otherwise, your circle will not be a good circle. And I think at this point I'm losing a little bit of thought, but she also talked about Lamia, which means man of the universe that watches over us. And she also talked about how we need to do careful work because the spirit world of the animals also watch us. So after she did this, she cut all the parts she marked off, and once again, very carefully, because you strive for accuracy. And she said, if we're not careful, we're considered one who's sloppy. And that's not a good trait. So she said, now the ugly old wind ngak to the ungalak must be slapped together, and chalagak and ganaknak slapped together. And this is where she rounded the very tiny little tips off. She opened it and went to south. Now the opposite, east and west, and again snip the uneven pieces off. And that's as far as she went. And her circle was pretty accurate. And what she did last was to check once again. And she went like this. 2 tiknaks. Tiknak is equal to the widths of these, and she said this is also the width. It could be on the bottom of the headdress if you want it that wide. And this, on the other hand, now fits her body size. Pretty accurate. Now that you've watched me make the circle the way Elena Pat did, I'd like for you to think with me and also see where the circle fits within the square. And this is exactly what she did. These lines match up with the square, and you as teachers can use the circle now just as you can use the square. My mother would be very pleased that we're using mathematical concepts to teach our present day students with the knowledge she gave us. And likewise, Elena Pat would be thrilled to know that geometry is being taught, and I'm sure both of them would think, oh, they're so smart, they know what we're talking about, because now we have math terms that we can lay over what the elders taught us. Geometry that was used in my mother's square making was also used in making the circle, and some of the foundational ideas like the early algebraic thinking is also involved in making the square, whereas some of the ratios and proportions are also embedded in the circle making and also into the square making. And I bet both women would be thrilled to know that they have made a good contribution to teaching of mathematics. Oyan.